If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description. Holy shit! Now that's how you open a f***ing door. Anyone remember the beloved 2D platformer classic Beyond the Ice Palace from the days of the Spectrum, Commodore 64, Atari ST, Amiga, and Amstrad? Me neither! I was 3 and barely sentient when the game dropped way back in 1988. So you can imagine my confusion when it got a sequel 36 years later. To prep for this review, I decided to watch a playthrough of the original game. Just give me a moment while I pull up a long play.
5 minutes later.
Oh. Okay then, that was short. Not a lot of material here to make a sequel. The folks over at Storybird Studio are gonna need to put on their thinking caps if they're gonna continue this story.
Long ago, the gods elected their champion by firing a sacred arrow from the heavens. The kingdom prospered, and the king was beloved by all. 1 year, a single arrow, a wicked curse was cast. The blackened steel pierced his breast. Without its royal protector, the kingdom was soon overrun. The wise sages of the deep forest gathered their remaining strength. They sought to resurrect the fallen hero and to restore some semblance of his former power, so he might enact vengeance on the traitors.
Oh, okay then. The folks over at Storybird Studio did in fact bring their thinking caps to continue the story. I'm impressed they made something out of such limited material. Good for them. But seriously, what is Beyond the Ice Palace 2 about? The game follows the cursed king, the protagonist of the first game, I guess he wasn't cursed then, but anyway, who's been betrayed and sealed away by his own advisors or whatever pages are. Now freed, he seeks vengeance against the demonic forces overrunning his kingdom. But does this long-awaited sequel reclaim its throne, or does it crumble under the weight of its own ambition?
Combat.
The cursed king is too angry to stay dead and decides to use the chains that once bound him as weapons of revenge and mass destruction. One look at Beyond the Ice Palace 2 and you'll be like, Castlevania? Is that you? And for the most part, yeah, it plays very similarly to Castlevania. But Konami's not playing with Castlevania right now, so why not let others have a turn? The king can whip his chains in any direction, both on the ground and while airborne, and he can flail them around for some 360-degree coverage. Perfect for pushing enemies back to allow for breathing room and for countering projectiles. Speaking of countering, the king also has a dodge that, when timed perfectly, allows him to slow down time and smack enemies in the back of the head. There's just something about bullet time with a whip that's so satisfying. Dodging requires stamina, the yellow bar up top, and without stamina, you won't be doing any cool bullet time dodges. Or any dodging at all, for that matter. Normal attacks don't require stamina, but flailing and the king's charged attack do. Considering that dodging takes half your stamina, conservation should be at the forefront of your mind as you rip and tear through legions of skeletons and demons. Honestly, most of the hits I took in this game were because I ran out of stamina and tried to dodge. I'm telling you, that dodge is expensive stamina-wise. You gotta keep your eye on it. Overall, I really like the King's combat. It's slower yet methodical, and there's a lot of risk-reward elements to it thanks to its stamina system, turning a potentially brainless battle system into something more mindful. I also love the chains' range. Most enemies are going to be at a disadvantage thanks to the King's reach, and the flailing move actually pushes enemies back. I love combat that rewards proper positioning. And the game doesn't stop there. The King's chains can also grab on the rings. The grab move is utilized a lot in the game's platforming, but I'll save that for the next section. But as far as combat is concerned, there's lots you can grab and destroy. Enemy shields, insect exoskeletons, enemy armor. Basically, anytime you see a ring on an enemy, that means you can do something pretty heinous to them. Personally, I'm a big fan of latching onto an enemy and then charging in to bust up their face. Very satisfying. The enemy variety on offer is pretty vast. Each biome or stage comes with unique enemies, and some of these enemies are straight up bastards. You'll be stomping on a lot of skeletons in your travels, but even they come in a large variety with different weapons, shields, and tactics. And some of these flying enemies can just suck it. Also, this zombie bear. No thank you. And the bosses are pretty cool too. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 takes a very firm stance on its retro throwback philosophy that goes beyond its aesthetics. Bosses feel very retro with predictable patterns that loop. Personally, I love boss battles like this. They're tough at first, but once you get their moveset and patterns down, you'll clear them without a scratch. And once you had that knowledge down, you could add insult to injury by activating Rage Mode. Hitting enemies fills the rage meter, and once it's full, activate it for some extra damage and whip speed. These demons won't even know what hit them, but you'll know what hit them. Flaming chains with knives at the end of them. It's awesome. But not all bosses can be overpowered. Some are a bit puzzle-like and require you to figure out how to even approach them before you can do damage. Overall, bosses were pretty good with some nice mix-ups here and there. I especially liked bosses that required some chain grappling platforming to take out, though the chain grappling could use a little more polish, but more on that in the next section. And that's it for combat. Overall, combat in Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is a solid mix of strategy, positioning, and old-school action. The combination of chain-based attacks, stamina management, and enemy variety keeps battles engaging, while the boss fights offer a satisfying blend of pattern recognition and spectacle. I mean, maybe not all the bosses, like this one's literally like a flying purple baby with a knife. It's funny, but I wouldn't say epic or a spectacle. Anyway, the game's commitment to retro-inspired design works in its favor, making each fight feel rewarding once mastered. While the stamina system can be punishing, the sheer satisfaction of whipping through hordes of enemies makes up for it. Now, let's talk about how those chains play into the game's platforming.
Abilities, platforming.
First up though, the king's abilities. He has 3, a double jump, a dash that breaks walls, and a dart to create grabbable rings on certain surfaces. For a relatively short game, I took it down in 6.5 hours. That's a decent amount of abilities, especially considering that one's uncommon for the genre and another pretty unique. Upgrading your dash to break walls also turns it into an attack, as well as allows players to dash in any direction, essentially giving players a triple jump. And the dart is really cool, letting players create their own rings to swing off of. Now, let's talk about that swinging. I found grabbing onto rings and swinging to be good fun, but it needs a little more polish, and this is evident in the more challenging areas that require speedy inputs later in the game. I'm not a dev, but maybe increasing rings' hitboxes would help. There were some times I just whiff when I swore I hit it, or at least came in close proximity to when it would actually latch on. This didn't happen very often, but I thought I'd bring it up. My only complaint about anything in this game is how slow the king moves. Whether he's Belmont stomping through a graveyard or Donkey Kong swinging over a lava pit, the king is moving pretty slowly. It's not a huge deal, but I didn't do a lot of backtracking because of how slow he moved. Backtracking isn't necessary in this game, but more on that in the exploration section. Overall, when it comes to using the chains as traversal tools, I liked it, especially pressing a button to zip forward real quick. Though this move does leave the airborne king pretty vulnerable. There are some moves the king does that would feel very at home with its traditional Castlevania counterparts. And by that I mean, some of the king's moves are stiff. Unlike the Belmonts, the king does have some air control when he jumps, but you can really feel the stiffness after you zip or use the air dash. These moves have a very specific range and a cooldown animation after use that has the king drop like a rock. Eventually, you can counter this with the double jump, which I really appreciated. As for moment-to-moment platforming, it's pretty good and surprisingly varied. The king can climb stairs and grab onto ledges, all while fighting off demons and skeletons, and there's a lot of swinging and puzzle solving to be had. The puzzles aren't brain-busting, but they're fun to execute, as most are environmental affairs that require you to pull levers, open gates, or push or pull an object. Each biome or stage also comes with gimmicks to keep the game fresh. You got your poisonous swamps, dark caverns with fireflies to light the way, and rocket-propelled minecarts. No, I will not elaborate. That's it for this section. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 does a great job integrating the king's chains into both traversal and puzzle solving, making for some creative and enjoyable platforming. The swinging mechanics, while fun, could use a bit more polish, and the king's slow movement speed can make backtracking feel sluggish. That said, the variety in platforming challenges, environmental puzzles, and biome-specific gimmicks keeps things fresh throughout the adventure.
Progression.
Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is a Metroid-like, through and through, despite having a skill tree. Upgrading that skill tree requires you to find power crystals and power crystal shards. Find 5 shards, take them to this Chad, and boom, you got yourself a power crystal. Sitting on a throne opens the skill tree, and placing power crystals on stat paths enhances that stat. It's a very simplistic system that kept me excited and engaged as I explored the world. It took me a minute to realize not every crystal contributed to stat increases though. Only the crystals you place on nodes with green arrows increased that path's stat. So be cautious of that as you enhance the king. A couple of words of advice. Be mindful of how you place your crystals, because I'm pretty sure there's not enough crystals in the game to enhance everything. And don't sleep on the gas stat like I did. I know it sounds like a meme, but it's important in the late game when checkpoints become fewer and farther between. You're going to want every food item you pick up to count. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 also has shops where you can exchange money for crystals, items, and equipment. Money can be found all over the place, inside candles, dropped by enemies, inside chests, and you lose all your money every time you die. Thankfully, you bank whatever cash you have on hand every time you reach a checkpoint. But if you have a wad of cash and haven't touched a checkpoint in a while, things can get pretty intense, especially because you have no way of retrieving that money after you die. Listen, I know I said I didn't want corpse running in my MVs, but I also didn't want all my money taken away upon death either. I really gotta be careful what I ask for. Talk about some real monkey's paw type shit, am I right? The equipment you can buy can also be enhanced by finding pearls and taking them to this Chad. And he doesn't even charge you. What a Chad. And that's it for progression. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 keeps progression simple yet engaging, with a crystal-based skill tree and equipment upgrades offering meaningful improvements. While losing all your money on death can be frustrating, the banking system at checkpoints adds a layer of risk management that keeps things interesting. Just be mindful of your crystal placements and don't underestimate the gas stat. Trust me on this one.
Exploration.
Exploration's a mixed bag for Ice Palace. Not that it does anything bad. It just does things in a non-Metroidvania way. I'd say Beyond the Ice Palace 2 would be best described as an action platformer game with Metroidvania elements. That's not to say the game isn't a Metroidvania, it's just that its Metroidvania-ness is second to its action platformer-ness. The game's very linear with only a couple of moments of necessary backtracking on its critical path. Any other backtracking you'll do will be for secret areas and hidden upgrades, which is very rewarding, especially when you find a bronze key or a pearl to enhance your equipment. I guess I should talk about Ice Palace's exploration in general. Generally, exploration is pretty rewarding. Even though the game's almost entirely a move from left to right experience, there are all kinds of opportunities to go off the beaten path to find hidden chests, locked doors to secret areas, and money caches. It was always a thrill to stumble upon a false wall harboring a secret treasure chest. Mostly, what you'll be finding while exploring is gonna be chests either hidden from players or stuck behind a puzzle or platforming challenge. And in these chests, you'll find power crystals, power crystal shards, money, pearls, or keys. Keys were always exciting to find as there are lots of locked doors scattered throughout the world that are teasing you. One of which hiding a particularly cool throwback to the original game. My only issue with the game's exploration is that I didn't like backtracking because the king moved so slowly. Also, there's no map. Not that the game needs one because it's mostly a move from left to right affair, but I would have liked a way to mark up points of interest so I could easily revisit them. A point in Ice Palace's favor is that it gets fast travel right. Every save point is a fast travel point. You just have to notice that sitting on a throne opens up a menu with tabs, one of which being for the map so you can fast travel. Yeah, it took me a second to figure that out. That's it for exploration. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 takes a more action platformer approach to exploration, with Metroidvania elements playing a secondary role. While the linear design and lack of map may disappoint genre purists, the game still offers plenty of rewarding secrets, hidden chests, and locked doors to uncover. Fast travel is handled well, and the thrill of finding power-ups and keys keeps exploration engaging. If only the king moved a little faster, backtracking would be far more enjoyable.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
First and foremost, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is gorgeous. From its environments, to its pixel work, to its animations, visually, the game's a treat for the eyes. And its gothic backdrops are complemented perfectly by its outstanding music. On the presentation front, Ice Palace is top-tier stuff. Even its enemy design stands out, despite largely using the world's most generic enemy type, the skeleton. You got your basic skeleton, your pirate skeleton, your direct action skeleton. That's a reference to an MV that came out in 2024. 1,000 points to Slytherin if anyone gets it in the comments. I really liked the large boss designs. I'm always a huge fan of large pixel bosses that distinctly give off Eldritch vibes. The final boss in particular was a favorite of mine. Of course I'm not going to show it, but I definitely looked at it and was like, what the f*** is that thing? Love it. Returning to its gothic fantasy setting, each biome has a distinct look. From crumbling castles to fiery villages to eerie graveyards, contributing to a strong sense of place. The color palette and lighting effects create an oppressive yet beautiful world that suits the game's dark tone. So, if you like that gothic look and feel, Ice Palace has definitely got your back. Narratively, the premise of a betrayed king rising from the dead to exact revenge and reclaim his throne works well as a solid foundation. Beside his angry screams, the king's a silent protagonist with the singular objective to tear his treacherous pages apart and rip through every demon in his way. As a retro throwback, don't expect there to be strong character moments or significant plot developments. The narrative serves more as a backdrop than a driving force, and that fits for the game that was created. Lastly, there are a couple of endings, but getting either comes down to a binary choice after defeating the final boss. From what I've experienced, I could only get one ending in my playthrough. After beating the game, I reloaded to get the other, but the final boss didn't respawn. Maybe that won't be a thing after a patch or two. Or maybe it's intentional, I don't know. And that's it for this section. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 nails its gothic fantasy presentation, delivering stunning pixel art, eerie environments, and a fantastic soundtrack that perfectly complements its dark atmosphere. Enemy and boss designs stand out, adding to the game's visual appeal. The narrative, while sparse, does exactly what it needs to do for a game so heavy on the action by simply providing character motivation before letting players go out and wreck every monster in their path. NPCs, villain monologues, and environmental storytelling will do the rest.
Final thoughts and score.
Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is a stylish and satisfying throwback to classic action platformers, blending Metroidvania elements with tight combat, creative traversal mechanics, and a visually stunning gothic world. The chain-based combat is methodical and rewarding. Platforming is engaging, if a little stiff, and exploration, while linear, still offers plenty of secrets to uncover. That said, the slow movement speed, lack of a map to mark up, and the somewhat punishing death system can hold the experience back for some. For those who enjoy old school challenge, deliberate combat, and dark fantasy settings, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is absolutely worth checking out. It confidently delivers a solid, action-heavy experience. I award Beyond the Ice Palace 2 an 8 out of 10. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is available on PC and all major consoles starting March 11th, 2025. Physical copies for the PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch will be available at most major retailers starting March 13th, 2025. I played Beyond the Ice Palace 2 exclusively on the Steam Deck with 0 issues. Therefore, I give the game a Steam Deck rating of verified.
Pair placement.
Beyond the Ice Palace 2 delivers a fun and satisfying experience with its chain-based combat, engaging platforming, and stunning gothic presentation. However, its stage-based world and highly linear structure with a lack of true exploratory freedom holds Ice Palace back from being in the upper echelons of the genre. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 swings its way into the C tier. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is a fantastic action platformer game with Metroidvania elements that, despite me placing it in the average MV tier, would still be enjoyed by Metroidvaniers, no doubt about it. The C really just reflects how Metroidvania the game is. And while the game borrows from the genre's formula, at its core, Ice Palace is really a side-scrolling action game for fans of old school games. You know, fans like me. I highly recommend picking it up. It may barely scratch that Metroidvania itch, but for those of you who just want an excellent retro gaming throwback that makes even the best traditional Castlevanias envious, then Beyond the Ice Palace 2 would be an ice addition to your collection.